There is something about this message that feels different from the moment you found it. You may have been going through your day normally, thinking about ordinary things, carrying ordinary responsibilities, when suddenly a thought about your soulmate came into your mind. Maybe you tried to push it away. Maybe you told yourself that you should stop wondering what they are doing, who they are talking to, or whether they have finally realized what they lost. But then something inside you brought the question back again. Why do I still feel that something is changing? Why does it feel like a chapter is closing? Why does it seem as though something happened behind the scenes that I was never supposed to witness? Sometimes life changes before you receive the evidence. Sometimes a person reaches a turning point long before they have the courage to explain it. And sometimes the silence surrounding a situation is not proof that nothing is happening. It is simply the space in which people are being forced to face consequences, choices, and truths they tried to avoid. This message is about that kind of turning point. Something may have happened recently that completely changed the emotional atmosphere surrounding your soulmate and their past. The person connected to their past may have been confronted with a reality they could no longer escape. A truth may have surfaced. A situation may have turned around in a way nobody expected. A decision may have been made. A conversation may have happened. Or perhaps someone finally realized that the treatment they once gave another person could not continue without consequences, and that is where the meaning of karma enters this story. Karma does not always arrive dramatically. It does not always look like revenge. It does not always mean someone suffers because they caused pain. Sometimes karma is simply truth becoming impossible to ignore. Sometimes karma is losing access to someone you once took for granted. Sometimes karma is realizing that attention cannot be demanded. Sometimes karma is discovering that a person you thought would always remain available has finally chosen peace. Sometimes karma is sitting alone with memories that used to make you feel powerful and realizing that those memories no longer give you control. And sometimes karma is watching the person you once underestimated become stronger, calmer, wiser, and completely different from the person you thought you could manipulate. That may be the deeper message behind what happened. Your soulmate's past may have looked stronger from the outside than it actually was on the inside. People can appear happy while carrying unresolved tension. They can post smiles while avoiding difficult conversations. They can act confident while secretly questioning every decision they have made. They can remain connected to someone because of history, habit, guilt, fear, or familiarity without that connection truly representing love, and there comes a moment when pretending becomes harder than admitting the truth. That moment can arrive quietly, one conversation, one unexpected message, one discovery, one realization, one sentence that changes everything, one night when somebody finally says what they have been holding inside. You may never know exactly what happened, and you do not need to invent details to understand the larger spiritual lesson. What matters is that people eventually have to live with the consequences of their choices. Your soulmate may have been watching their past from a completely different perspective lately. Perhaps they once believed they needed closure from their ex. Perhaps they believed they could repair something that had already changed. Perhaps they kept returning emotionally to a situation because they were attached to the memories rather than the reality. But reality has a way of revealing itself. The relationship that once looked important may begin to feel empty. The words that once sounded convincing may begin to sound rehearsed. The promises that once carried weight may begin to feel meaningless. And the person who once seemed impossible to replace may suddenly be seen clearly for who they are. That kind of realization can shake someone deeply, because when a person finally sees a relationship without the filter of nostalgia, they may discover that they were not holding on to love, they were holding on to a chapter, and chapters are meant to end. There is a reason you may have felt strangely emotional lately. There is a reason memories may have surfaced unexpectedly. There is a reason you may have found yourself thinking about your soulmate without intentionally doing so. These experiences can happen when your mind is processing uncertainty, hope, attachment, and the possibility of change. But perhaps the most important part of this message is not what happened to the ex, it is what is happening inside you. You are becoming less interested in chasing answers. You are becoming less willing to compete. You are becoming less willing to prove that you deserve love. You are beginning to understand that genuine love should not require you to constantly convince someone of your worth, and that transformation changes everything, because when you stop fighting for a position in someone's life, you begin to see whether they genuinely choose to make room for you. That is where your power returns, not through revenge, not through jealousy, not through watching another person's downfall. Through peace. Imagine your soulmate sitting somewhere after a difficult realization, thinking about the past differently than they did before. Maybe they remember conversations they once dismissed. Maybe they remember your patience. Maybe they remember the way you supported them when they were confused. Maybe they remember moments when they could have chosen honesty but chose silence instead, and now those memories feel different, because distance can reveal what closeness sometimes hides. When someone has constant access to you, they may fail to recognize your value. When you step back, they suddenly have room to notice your absence. That does not mean you should disappear to manipulate someone. It means that healthy distance can reveal truth. If someone genuinely values you, they will eventually understand what your presence means. If they do not, their absence may save you from spending years trying to convince them. Either way, you gain clarity, and perhaps that is the real karma beginning to unfold, not destruction, clarity. The past may be losing its influence. Your soulmate may be recognizing that some connections were built around attachment rather than alignment. They may be recognizing that familiar does not always mean healthy. They may be realizing that history does not automatically equal destiny, and that realization can be uncomfortable, because people often cling to what they know even when what they know is hurting them. Your soulmate may have spent time trying to make sense of an old relationship. They may have asked themselves why they stayed so long, why certain things happened, why they ignored certain signs, or why they allowed certain behavior to continue. Eventually, those questions lead somewhere. they lead inward, and when someone begins looking inward, they stop blaming everyone else. They start seeing their own choices. That is a powerful moment, because your soulmate's journey is not simply about what their ex did, it is also about what your soulmate allowed. And perhaps this is the part nobody wants to talk about. Sometimes the person who hurt us is not the only person responsible for our pain. Sometimes we remained because we were afraid to leave. Sometimes we accepted less because we were afraid nothing better would come. Sometimes we confused emotional intensity with love. Sometimes we stayed because we remembered the beginning and hoped the ending would return to it. Sometimes we knew something was wrong but were not ready to face it, and when the truth finally becomes unavoidable, there can be a painful but necessary awakening. Your soulmate may be experiencing that awakening now. They may be realizing that love should not feel like constant uncertainty. They may be realizing that trust cannot survive endless dishonesty. They may be realizing that a relationship cannot be carried by one person, and they may also be realizing that someone else was offering them something they were not emotionally prepared to receive. That someone may be you. But do not let this message convince you that you must wait endlessly. You are not being asked to put your life on pause. You are not being asked to monitor another person's relationship. You are not being asked to celebrate someone's pain. You are being invited to recognize your own growth. Because if your soulmate eventually returns, the healthiest version of that reunion will not be built on someone else's downfall. It will be built on two people choosing honesty, two people choosing maturity, two people choosing communication, two people choosing each other without games. That is the kind of love worth waiting for, not a love that needs an enemy, not a love that needs someone to lose. Not a love that depends on jealousy, a love that simply stands in the truth. And perhaps something happened last night that symbolically represents exactly that. Maybe a conversation finally exposed what had been hidden. Maybe an argument forced someone to acknowledge what they had been avoiding. Maybe your soulmate finally recognized that the past was no longer where their heart belonged. Maybe someone from the past attempted to reopen a door that was already closing. Maybe your soulmate received information that changed their perspective. Maybe they simply sat alone and realized they could not keep pretending. You do not need to know which one. The message is about the emotional turning point. Sometimes the biggest changes happen in silence. A person can make a life-changing decision without announcing it to anyone. They can wake up one morning and realize, I cannot continue living like this. They can put down their phone, they can stop replying, they can stop explaining, they can stop arguing, they can stop chasing, and suddenly, the entire dynamic changes. That is why the energy around the past can feel different. Because one person's decision to stop participating in an unhealthy cycle can affect everyone involved. The ex may not have expected it. They may have believed your soulmate would always return. They may have believed they could say anything and still receive another chance. They may have believed history gave them permanent access. But history does not give anyone permanent ownership of another human being. People are allowed to grow. People are allowed to change. People are allowed to leave. People are allowed to choose peace. and when someone finally understands that, the old power structure collapses. That can feel like karma. The person who once felt secure suddenly feels uncertain. The person who once ignored boundaries suddenly discovers boundaries exist. The person who once assumed another person would wait forever suddenly realizes that waiting is not guaranteed, and your soulmate may be learning the same lesson from the other side. They may be learning that your heart is not something they can put on a shelf and return to whenever convenient. You deserve consistency. You deserve respect. You deserve someone who can communicate. You deserve someone who does not make you question whether you matter. And if your soulmate wants a future with you, they will eventually have to understand that. Maybe that is why the title of this message feels so shocking. Because the biggest surprise may not be what happened to the ex. The biggest surprise may be what your soulmate finally understood because of it. Sometimes another person's actions become the mirror that forces us to recognize our own mistakes. Your soulmate may be looking at the past and thinking, "Why did I allow this?" And then another thought may follow, "Why did I overlook the person who was actually there for me?" That realization can be powerful, but remember, realization is not the same as transformation. Someone can realize they made a mistake and still need time to change. Someone can miss you and still need to learn how to love you properly. Someone can regret losing you and still not be ready for a healthy relationship. That distinction matters. Do not settle for words alone. Let action speak. If your soulmate comes toward you, pay attention to consistency. Do they communicate? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they take responsibility? Do they apologize without making excuses? Do they make choices that match their promises? Do they create peace instead of confusion? Those are the signs that matter, because the strongest spiritual message is not your soulmate will return. It is you are becoming wise enough to recognize what genuine love looks like. That wisdom will protect you. You may have once believed love meant enduring everything. Now you may understand that love also requires boundaries. You may have once believed loyalty meant waiting no matter what. Now you may understand that loyalty should never require abandoning yourself. You may have once believed that if you loved someone enough, they would eventually choose you. Now you may understand that another person's choice cannot be forced. And that is freedom. Your soulmate's ex may face consequences. Your soulmate may face consequences. You may face consequences for choices you made too. But consequences are not necessarily punishment. They can be teachers. They can show us what needs to change. They can redirect us. They can close doors we were too afraid to close ourselves. They can remove illusions. They can reveal character. They can create space for something healthier. Perhaps what happened last night was not the end of a love story. Perhaps it was the end of an illusion. And sometimes the end of an illusion is the beginning of peace. Think about that for a moment. You may have spent so much energy wondering what was happening between your soulmate and their past that you forgot to ask what was happening within yourself. You were changing. You were becoming stronger. You were learning to trust your instincts. You were learning that you cannot control another person's decisions. You were learning to stop begging for clarity. And slowly, something shifted. You became less desperate for an answer. that is when life begins to feel different, because you stop living according to someone else's choices, you begin living according to your own values. And ironically, that can be the moment when someone from your past finally notices your absence, not because you manipulated them, because your energy, attention, and emotional availability are no longer being given automatically. There is a quiet dignity in that. You do not have to announce that you are walking away. You do not have to make someone jealous. You do not have to prove that you are desirable. You simply continue becoming the person you are meant to become. Your soulmate may notice. Their ex may notice. Other people may notice. But most importantly, you notice. You notice that you are no longer the same person who tolerated confusion. You notice that you can feel deeply without losing yourself. You notice that you can love someone and still choose yourself. You notice that you can hope for reconciliation without building your entire future around it. That is maturity. That is healing. That is strength. And perhaps that is why this message found you at this particular moment. Not to make you obsessed with what happened last night, not to encourage you to search for proof, not to convince you that someone is being punished somewhere, but to remind you that hidden circumstances eventually become visible. Truth has patience. People can hide things for a while. They can avoid conversations. They can create stories. They can pretend. But eventually, choices produce consequences. A relationship built on dishonesty eventually struggles under the weight of dishonesty. A relationship built on manipulation eventually becomes exhausting. A relationship built on fear eventually demands freedom. And a relationship built on genuine respect has room to breathe. Your soulmate may be discovering that difference. Maybe the old relationship felt intense because it was unstable. Maybe they confused arguments with passion. Maybe they confused jealousy with love. Maybe they confused familiarity with compatibility. And now they are seeing that love can be quiet. Love can be safe. Love can be honest. Love can allow two people to breathe. Perhaps you represent that possibility. But you do not need to convince them. Let them discover it. If they are meant to walk toward you, let their actions demonstrate that choice. If they are not ready, allow yourself to continue forward. Your life is too valuable to be spent waiting for another person's emotional education. You can have compassion for your soulmate's journey without becoming responsible for it. You can understand their past without becoming trapped in it. You can forgive without reopening a door. You can love someone without accepting unhealthy behavior. And you can believe in a beautiful future without pretending you know exactly how it will unfold. That balance is important. Maybe your soulmate's ex did experience a major wake-up call. Maybe a consequence arrived. Maybe a relationship changed. Maybe something unexpected happened. But the deeper lesson is this. Nobody can build a peaceful future while continuously carrying an unresolved past. At some point, the past has to be acknowledged. Not worshipped, not feared, not repeated, acknowledged, then released. Your soulmate may be reaching that point, and if they are, they may feel conflicted, they may feel guilty, they may feel embarrassed. They may feel angry at themselves. They may wonder why they did not see certain things earlier. They may even miss parts of the past despite knowing they should move forward. That is normal. Leaving an unhealthy chapter does not automatically erase every memory. Healing is not a straight line. Someone can know a relationship was wrong and still grieve it. Someone can recognize a mistake and still feel attached to familiar memories. Someone can be ready for something new and still need time to process something old. So if your soulmate eventually approaches you, remember that they may need emotional maturity, not just romantic feelings. You should not have to become their therapist. You should not have to rescue them. You should not have to repair everything their past damaged. A healthy relationship is not one person fixing another. It is two people taking responsibility for themselves and building something together. That is the future worth imagining. Picture a moment where your soulmate finally speaks honestly. No dramatic performance, no excuses, no blaming, just truth. They may tell you that they did not understand your value before. They may admit that they were confused. They may acknowledge that they allowed the past to influence decisions that hurt you. They may say that they needed to lose access to your energy before understanding what your presence meant, and maybe you will listen differently than you would have months ago. Because you are different now, you will not be satisfied by beautiful words alone. You will look for evidence. You will look for consistency. You will look for peace. You will ask yourself whether this person is capable of giving you the kind of love you deserve. That is the real transformation. The old version of you might have accepted an apology immediately. The new version of you may listen carefully. The old version of you might have been